Pastor hadn't moved in over 3 hours. The old dog sat rigid as a tombstone, his yellow eyes fixed on the weather-beaten barn like he was watching something the world had long forgotten, something no living soul could see. The barn had been empty for months, silent, hollow, nothing but rotten memory. But the way Pastor stared at it, you'd think it was breathing. Thaddeus Bell wiped the sweat from his weathered palms and set down his axe. The woodpile could wait. Something was wrong, real wrong, and out here, in this vast, God-forsaken stretch of land where not even the wind bothered to whisper, Pastor was the only soul he trusted. The dog had been acting strange for weeks, spacing the porch at sundown, whimpering at shadows, ignoring the scraps he once devoured with glee. But this wasn't restlessness. This was different. The old rancher crossed the yard slowly, boots crunching on sun-baked earth. Pastor's ears twitched at the sound, but his eyes didn't stray from the barn, didn't blink, didn't move. His body was taut as a drawn bowstring, trembling like a wire about to snap. "What is it, boy?" Thaddeus murmured, crouching beside him. He followed the dog's fixed gaze to the barn's gaping mouth. Nothing moved in the shadows. Same rotted beams, same rusted tools swaying gently from their hooks, same forgotten stalls that hadn't known livestock since Martha died. And yet, Pastor's nostrils flared, his breath quickened. Then Thaddeus heard it, too, a sound so faint it might have been imagined scratching, a slow, deliberate scraping, like claws raking against wood, or something trying to claw its way out. Pastor's muscles tensed beneath his matted fur. His lips peeled back, revealing yellowed teeth, but no growl came, just silence, thick and suffocating, a silence that clung to the skin like damp wool. And Pastor was afraid. This was the dog who'd faced down coyotes and coiled rattlers without flinching, the dog who'd stood guard through winter blizzards and scorching summers, and now he was trembling like a leaf in a thunderstorm. A cold dread crept up Thaddeus's spine. In 45 years on this land, he'd never seen Pastor like this. The dog sensed something buried beneath the surface of human understanding, something that had been whispering to him, pulling him here night after night like a siren's call. The scratching came again, longer this time, heavier, measured. Thaddeus rose slowly, hand drifting instinctively to the knife strapped to his belt. The barn looked no different, sun-scorched planks, rust-bitten hinges, shadows slinking like ghosts in the amber light. But Pastor's stare told another tale. Something was out there, or in there, something hidden, something not meant to be found. He didn't know what, but tomorrow he'd find out. Because whatever was buried near that barn, it wasn't going to stay buried much longer. Dawn broke cold and gray, casting a dull sheen across the land like the world was holding its breath. Pastor hadn't moved all night. Thaddeus had watched from the bedroom window, the dog's silhouette etched against the barn like a sentinel guarding secrets too dark for daylight. Now, in the quiet of the kitchen, Thaddeus cradled a chipped mug of bitter coffee and stared through the dirty glass. Pastor still hadn't eaten. His ribs stood out beneath his thinning coat, fur-clumped with dew and dust. Whatever called to him from that barn, it was stronger than hunger, stronger than habit, stronger than love. Thaddeus pulled on his worn jacket, the fabric stiff with years of sweat and sun. The air outside was dry and sharp, carrying the scent of dust and dying grass. His boots thudded hollow across the porch. Pastor flicked an ear toward him, but didn't look away. "Been out here all night again, haven't you?" he said softly, kneeling beside the old dog. Pastor's fur was damp, chilled through. His breath came fast and shallow, like every inhale was a struggle. Then, for the first time in 12 years, Pastor whimpered, a low, mournful sound, barely more than a vibration in his throat, but it struck Thaddeus like a hammer to the chest. This wasn't fear. This was deeper, older, a warning. Thaddeus followed his companion's gaze. The barn stood in its familiar decay, but now his eyes caught something new, subtle. The earth near the eastern wall darker, looser, like it had been disturbed. He stepped forward, heart ticking faster. Pastor followed, steps cautious, tail low. The soil around the barn's edge was soft, not hardened like the rest of the yard. Someone had been digging here, recently, within a day or two, at most. but who the nearest neighbor, Ezra Crow, lived 5 miles south. And he hadn't set foot on this land in a decade. No one else had reason to come this far. No one even knew this place existed anymore. Pastor stopped cold, every muscle locked tight. His nose pointed toward a patch of earth just beyond the barn's corner. Thaddeus knelt, brushing the soil away. With calloused fingers, the dirt was soft, giving way too easily beneath it. His hand struck something smooth. Not stone, fabric. Heavy. Rough. His gut turned. Pastor let out another soft whine and backed away like the ground itself had burned him. Thaddeus's mind raced. Something was buried here. Something human. The uneaten pastor's bones, the sleepless nights, the stairs. It had all led to this. He turned back toward the house, legs numb, and returned moments later with a shovel. Pastor stayed behind, watching from the porch, eyes wide and unblinking. The first shovelful came up like lifting ash, too loose, too fresh. Whoever did this hadn't bothered to cover their tracks well. They were in a hurry, or afraid, or both. 6 inches down, the blade hit something firm, not a rock, something that gave slightly under pressure. Thaddeus dropped to his knees, using his hands to scrape away the rest. The smell hit first, a sickly, sweet rot that clung to the air like syrup left in the sun. He knew that smell. Every rancher did. He pulled back a fold of canvas, revealing pale skin. Waxy, discolored. A hand. A woman's hand. Fingers stiff with death. A thin gold band still wrapped around one finger. Thaddeus stumbled backward, bile rising in his throat. Someone had buried a body on his land. A woman, not long dead. The wrapping was hasty but deliberate. Whoever did this had wanted the body hidden, and they'd chosen his land, his barn, to do it. But why? From the porch, Pastor let out a low bark, sharp, urgent, then silence again. His eyes were locked on Thaddeus, like he understood what had been uncovered. The dog had known. He'd sensed it. The wrongness in the earth, the pull of death buried in shallow ground. Thaddeus forced himself to look closer. The woman's hand was delicate, well manicured. Not a vagrant, someone who had a home, a life, people who loved her. And someone had taken all that away. The wedding ring caught the morning light. It gleamed, a cruel contrast against lifeless flesh. She'd been married, someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone who'd trusted the wrong person. Then, a sound froze the breath in his lungs. Hoofbeats. Fast, approaching from the southern road. Thaddeus's head snapped up. Someone was coming, minutes away. He reached for the canvas, trying to fold it back over the body, but it was too late. Whoever was riding toward the ranch was nearly here, and whatever truth was buried under that barn was about to rise into the light. There was a dead woman in Thaddeus Bell's yard. Her lifeless form lay half-shrouded in canvas, with his own shovel resting beside her like a silent accusation. Pastor, his old hound, barked wildly, each echo a jagged warning that bounced off the empty land. But warning of what? The lone rider barreling toward them, or something far worse? A plume of dust coiled behind Ezra Crow's galloping horse like smoke rising from scorched earth. The old man's face was carved by years and sun, but his eyes were sharp, sweeping across the ranch like a hawk sighting prey. Thaddeus had barely thrown the canvas back over the body when Ezra reined in hard, his horse skidding to a halt near the porch. "Morning, Thaddeus," Ezra called. But there was no warmth in his voice. His gaze cut straight to the shovel, the disturbed soil, the loose dirt still clinging to the iron. "Been doing some landscaping, I see." Pastor growled deep in his throat, low, steady, and dangerous. Thaddeus had never heard the dog growl at a neighbor before. His instincts were loud and feral, and Thaddeus was beginning to put more faith in those instincts than in his own judgment. "Just fixing some drainage issues," he said, trying to sound easy, stepping subtly between Ezra and the makeshift grave. Ground gets soft when the rain pulls up. Ezra dismounted with deliberate weight, his boots thudding against the earth. He was lean and tall, too well kept for a man claiming to fight his land for a living. His horse was sleek, its coat glossy, and his clothes had the kind of clean that spoke of luxury, not labor. For a man who lamented hard times, Ezra seemed to be thriving. "Funny thing about rain," Ezra said, sauntering toward the barn, eyes sliding over the mound of canvas-covered earth. "We haven't had a drop in 3 weeks." His pale eyes lingered on the dirt, on the canvas, on the way Pastor's hackles stayed raised, his pacing frantic. "What's got your dog so worked up?" Thaddeus felt sweat bead on his brow, even as the morning remained crisp. "Been acting strange lately. Might have caught scent of a wolf pack." "Wolves," Ezra repeated, his tone thoughtful, but one hand drifted casually to the pistol at his side. "They're sharp creatures. They know when death's been near, or fear, or guilt." He looked straight into Thaddeus's face as he said it. "Sometimes they dig up things meant to stay buried." A silence settled between the two men, taut as wire, humming with tension. Pastor's growl deepened, his whole body poised to spring. He stood between Ezra and the house, now every muscle ready to defend. "I've been missing something," Ezra went on, his tone almost conversational. "Something valuable went missing about a week ago. The kind of thing a man can't let go unsolved. You understand?" He took another step, boots brushing the disturbed soil. "You haven't seen anything strange, have you? Maybe someone passing through. Someone who might have left something behind." Thaddeus's mind raced. Ezra wasn't here by accident. He knew something. Maybe he'd even put the body there himself and had returned to see if it had been discovered. Either way, he was armed and dangerous. "Can't say I have," Thaddeus answered slowly, his fingers inching closer to the revolver resting on his hip. "Like I said, just drainage problems." Ezra smiled, but it was a dead thing, cold, measured. "Of course, drainage." His eyes flicked to Pastor, who was now snarling openly. "That's a loyal dog you've got. Protective sort. The kind that'd do just about anything for his master." The warning was clear, thinly veiled, and heavy with meaning. Ezra's words hung in the air like storm clouds. But before Thaddeus could respond, Pastor lunged forward, not at Ezra, but toward the forest's edge. His barking turned frantic, urgent. Thaddeus froze. HOOFBEATS. Multiple. Coming fast from the tree line. Ezra turned sharply, and for the first time, his face paled. Seems we're about to have company, neighbor. 3 riders burst from the trees, their horses soaked in sweat and froth, driven hard across miles. They weren't travelers, they were men on the run. Desperate, ruthless, dangerous. The lead rider was young, weary, his eyes wide and burning behind a bandana pulled low over his face. Behind him, 2 older men rode close, shadows in motion with faces like leather and expressions like stone. Ezra's hand tightened around the grip of his pistol. "Friends of yours?" he asked, voice gone stiff. "Never seen them before." Thaddeus replied, and it was the truth, but everything about this morning felt orchestrated. Pastor's obsession with the barn, the body, Ezra's sudden appearance, and now these strangers. Nothing felt like coincidence anymore. The lead rider pulled up, his horse throwing dust as it stopped short. He scanned the scene, the shovel, the dirt, the canvas. Then he smiled, slow, wicked, knowing. Well, he called out, not bothering to dismount. "Didn't expect to find company out here, Crow." His voice curled like smoke in the cool air. Ezra went stiff. Color drained from his face. "Jesse," he murmured, "what brings you this far north?" So they knew each other. Thaddeus's stomach turned. The world had tipped. Whatever game was being played here, he wasn't a player, he was the board. Jesse's smile didn't waver. "Looking for something. Thought you might have left it behind." His eyes flicked to the covered mound, to the shovel, then to Ezra. "But seems you already started digging." Pastor had gone still, but his body was taut with energy, watching, waiting, trembling with the need to act. He didn't trust these men, neither did Thaddeus. But now he realized something colder. They weren't just dangerous. They were connected, and somehow he was standing in the middle of a reckoning. And what he decided to do next would decide whether he'd live long enough to see the sun set behind those hills. Dog's instinct screamed louder than the rising whine. Danger was closing in from all sides. Pastor, the old mutt, stood stiff-legged near the edge of the grave, his yellow eyes locked on something unseen. Jesse urged his horse forward, keeping His gaze trained on the mound of disturbed earth partially hidden under the canvas tarp. "Funny thing, Ezra," Jesse said, voice low and sharp as a blade. "We've been tracking someone. And wouldn't you know it, the trail led us straight. Here, your neighbor's yard." He nodded toward the canvas, his tone almost conversational, but the undercurrent was lethal. "Mind if we take a peek at what you boys been digging up? That's private property," Thaddeus said, stepping forward before he could stop himself. He stood alone against 3 armed men, with Ezra still unreadable at his side. But this was his land, his responsibility. He wouldn't back down. Jesse chuckled, a sound brittle as shattered glass. "Private property," he says. "Hear that, boys? This rancher thinks secrets can stay buried under dirt and denial." His hand slid toward the revolver on his hip. "Problem is, friend, we already know what's buried here. The real question is, why are you digging her up?" The words struck Thaddeus like a punch to the gut. They knew, all of them. This wasn't some accidental discovery. It was deliberate, coordinated. The woman in that grave wasn't just a body, they had put her there, and Ezra Crow was tied up in it deep, him and these riders. And now Thaddeus was standing at the center of a web woven from secrets, greed, and blood. Pastor growled low and threatening, his body coiled like a spring. He could smell what Thaddeus had just begun to grasp. Killers. They were surrounded by men who had taken a life, maybe more. And the only witness to their crime who truly understood the weight of it was a dog that couldn't speak. Ezra's voice trembled slightly. "Now, Jesse, let's not do anything we'll regret. Rancher here doesn't know anything about our business, maybe," Jesse said, his smile curling cold. "But he knows now, and that makes him a problem," Leather whispered as hands moved to weapons, the air crackling with tension so thick it hummed. This quiet stretch of land was about to become a war zone, and Thaddeus Bell was stuck in the middle. Time slowed, each breath drawn like a lifetime. He saw it in Jesse's eyes, the same dead calculation he'd seen in dying animals when survival had slipped just out of reach. The 2 riders behind Jesse shifted, widening their stance, forming a triangle of death with Thaddeus and Ezra caught in its heart. But it was Pastor who moved first. The dog lunged not at the gunmen but straight for the canvas-shrouded grave. He clawed furiously at the covering, tearing it away with wild, frantic urgency. As the fabric peeled back, what lay beneath was exposed to the morning sun. A woman, young, 25, maybe, her dark hair tangled across her blood-slicked face. Her features, even in death, still hinted at the beauty they once carried. But it was her throat slashed brutally that turned Thaddeus's stomach. The dark bloom of dried blood across her dress whispered of horror and violence. Jesse's horse sidestepped, startled, but Jesse himself didn't flinch. His eyes had locked onto something else, something that wiped the color from his face. "You stupid old fool," he hissed at Ezra. "You buried her with the necklace round the woman's throat." Half hidden beneath the gore was a silver chain, delicate, glinting in the sun like a beacon. A pendant nestled at her collarbone, small, ornate, unmistakably valuable. Ezra took a stumbling step toward his horse, finally drawing his weapon. "I didn't have time, Jesse. I meant to. That necklace is worth more than this whole goddamn ranch." Jesse snapped, rage sharpening every syllable. "You were supposed to take it off her before she went in the ground." And in that moment, everything became clear. Thaddeus saw it, each puzzle piece falling into place with a sickening snap. The woman was murdered for the necklace. Ezra hadn't killed her. He was just the cleaner, the one who made the body disappear. But he'd failed. Whether out of greed or carelessness, he'd left the treasure on her. And now the past had caught up with him in the worst way. Pastor barked, once sharp, urgent, then bolted toward the house. A signal, a distraction. It was all Thaddeus would get. He dove behind the corner of the barn as Jesse's bullet screamed past his head, shattering the wooden siding inches from his skull. Gunfire exploded into the air, cracking, deafening. Ezra was firing from behind his horse, methodical and unflinching. One of Jesse's men cried out, slumping sideways off his saddle, clutching a red spreading shoulder. Ezra didn't hesitate. His pistol followed the wounded man like a hound on a scent, finishing what had begun. "The necklace, Jesse," Ezra shouted over the gunfire. "Tell me where you found it. Maybe we make a deal." Jesse's answer came as a bullet that tore bark from a nearby tree. "Go to hell, old man. You crossed us." Thaddeus pressed himself to the barn wall, bullets shrieking overhead. Through the narrow slats, he saw Jesse's last man creeping along the side of the house, trying to flank Ezra. The gunfight wasn't over, it was just changing shape. Pastor returned, panting, trembling against his master's leg. But it wasn't fear in the dog, it was energy. He knew justice was stirring from its grave. Then Thaddeus saw its sunlight glinting off the pendant again, and this time he recognized the locket for what it was, not just jewelry. It was familiar, personal, a symbol, and the memory of it twisted something inside him. Pastor whined and nudged his hand. Thaddeus looked down and saw something pale sticking from the dirt, just a torn edge at first, barely noticeable. He crouched and pulled it free. A letter, yellowed, fragile, hidden under earth like someone wanted it forgotten. He didn't even read it, just shoved it into his coat pocket. And then a sudden silence. The gunfire had ceased as suddenly as it began, leaving behind only the labored breathing of the wounded and the eerie silence that followed violence. Thaddeus peeked round the barn's corner, heart pounding, and saw Ezra standing over Jesse's body. Smoke curled lazily from the barrel of his revolver. "You should have minded your own business, boy," Ezra muttered, voice flat and unbothered, as if snuffing out a life was no more than flicking ash from a cigar. His attention shifted to the third man, wounded and crawling toward the tree line, leaving a dark red trail behind him in the dust. But Ezra didn't give chase. He turned instead, walking purposefully toward the open grave, with the swagger of a man convinced he'd won. He holstered his pistol and fixed his eyes on the silver necklace lying against the woman's cold, lifeless skin. There was a hunger in his gaze that made Thaddeus's stomach turn. Finally, Ezra whispered to himself, kneeling beside the corpse, "Should have done this myself from the start." "Pastor," the old hound growled low and deep, sensing something vile in the air. Ezra's hands reached for the necklace, treating the murdered woman not as a person, but as a lockbox to be cracked open. He fumbled with the clasp like a man blinded by greed. The sight was obscene, intimate, and profane. That's when Thaddeus saw it. The locket hanging open, swaying slightly from the woman's neck, catching the morning light. Inside the silver frame, protected by glass, was a photograph, a face. His face. Thaddeus's breath caught in his throat. The picture was of a younger him 15 years ago. Maybe more, but it was undeniably him. That meant the stranger, this murdered woman, had died with his portrait pressed against her heart. But how he'd never seen her before, never so much as passed her in a market or a church pew. And yet there it was, his image, quietly cradled in death. Ezra was still focused on the necklace, savoring his prize, unaware of the photograph hidden within. But Thaddeus knew, the moment Ezra noticed that picture, the hunter would become the hunted. He'd want answers and loose ends tied in blood. The groans of the wounded man still echoed from the forest beyond, faint and fading. Others would come soon. More guns, more questions, more death. And in Thaddeus's pocket, a letter burned against his chest like a brand, begging to be read. Then Ezra's fingers paused. He had finally seen it, the photograph. Confusion crept across his face, replacing the glint of victory. And then came the shift, realization, recognition. A dangerous understanding dawned in Ezra's eyes. His hand drifted slowly back to his weapon. "I know you're out there, Thaddeus," Ezra called, his voice sharp and curling with menace. "Saw you dive behind the barn when the shooting started. Come on out. We need to have a little talk about this picture." Thaddeus pressed himself against the barn wall, heart hammering. The letter in his pocket felt impossibly heavy now. Pastor stood at his side, muscles tense, eyes locked on the approaching threat. Ezra's boots crunched closer, his voice deceptively calm. "This locket raises some interesting questions, like why a dead girl was carrying your face around her neck, or what you might know about some unfinished business that got people killed." Thaddeus, desperate now, pulled the crumpled letter from his pocket. His hands shook as he unfolded it. The paper was torn at the edges, water-stained and dirt-smeared, but the handwriting was still clear. Feminine, urgent. "My dearest Thomas," the letter began. The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. "Thomas, his middle name, the one only Martha had ever used. If you are reading this, then something terrible has happened to me. I've discovered the truth about Father's death, and they know I know. Ezra Crow killed him for the mine claims, but I have proof. The silver necklace carries a map etched into its lining showing the real location of the Lucky Strike deposit. Father hid it there before he died. I'm bringing it to you because you're the only honest man he ever trusted. Your sister in spirit, if not in blood, Delilah wrote us. The letter slipped from Thaddeus's fingers like falling ash. Delilah, Martha's younger sister, the same woman who vanished 3 years ago. While digging into the so-called accident that killed their father, Martha had wept for months, convinced her sister had run from grief, unable to bear it. But that wasn't the truth. Ezra had killed their father, and when Delilah found the proof, he'd killed her too. Time's up, Ezra's voice snarled. From just around the barn's edge, Thaddeus stepped into the open, hands raised, mind clearer than it had been all morning. Pastor moved with him, placing his scarred body between his master and the danger. Ezra stood not 10 yards away, pistol ready in one hand, the open locket in the other. So you do know who she was, he said, voice bitter. Thought you might. That girl was always too curious, just like her old man. You killed her, Thaddeus said. Calm but firm. You killed her and her father for claims that probably don't even exist. Ezra let out a dry, joyless laugh. Oh, they exist. All right, old Rhodes found the mother lode before he died. But he was clever, hid the map, made sure no one could find it unless he wanted them to. She found it, though. That necklace is the key. Worth more than this whole damn territory. Was it worth their lives? Thaddeus asked. Everything's worth something to someone, Ezra replied coldly. Question is, what's your life worth now that you know the truth? He raised his weapon, but the answer came not in words. Pastor exploded into motion with a snarl like ripping canvas. 80 pounds of fury slammed into Ezra before he could fire. The gunshot went wide, cracking through the air as the two bodies hit the dirt hard. Pastor's teeth sank toward Ezra's throat. In the chaos, Thaddeus dove for Jesse's discarded pistol. He rose and fired in one smooth motion. The shot struck Ezra in the chest just as he shoved the dog off him and raised his weapon again. Ezra stumbled back, eyes wide, and fell into the very grave he had dug for Delilah. Blood soaked the earth. Pastor limped back to Thaddeus's side, panting, favoring his leg, but alive. Together they stood in the morning sun, staring down at the final justice delivered. 2 lives ended, 1 secret uncovered, a legacy defended by loyalty, courage, and a dog who never left his post. Later, when the sheriff had come and the bodies were taken away, Thaddeus gave Delilah Rhodes a proper burial, not in a shallow grave, but in the wildflower meadow beside her sister. And the necklace, the treasure everyone had died for, went with her. Some things, he understood now, were more valuable than gold. Pastor never returned to his post by the barn, but on quiet evenings, Thaddeus would often find him resting by the graves, ears alert, as though guarding the peace that had finally come to that haunted land. And the locket, now buried with its rightful owner, held more than a map it held. A story, one that would remain untold, except to the wind and the stars and the dog who had watched it all unfold.